Welcome back to the Q&R Podcast. I'm Rebecca Hanna, the director of LSQ Kids here at Redeemer LSQ. And together with Michael Keller, we're framing this podcast for the seeker and skeptic in all of us. It's designed to foster a posture of curiosity about ourselves and about others. We're in the midst of a mini two-part Q&R series aimed at addressing an important question. Is biblical sexuality outdated? Last week, we explored what the purpose of sex is and in what environment sex truly thrives. And if you haven't gotten a chance to watch that yet, we'd encourage you to go back and take a listen. This week, we put it all into practice. We address how to handle your sexual desires as a single person and also what a healthy sex life looks like when you are married. We try to get as practical as possible in this episode, and we believe that the strategies we will discuss today can have a huge impact on your own outlook of sexuality. So, part 2 of talking about sex.
Welcome back, everyone. Thanks for joining us again.
Welcome back. Part 2.
You want to get straight into it?
Yes,
because we left a lot of cliffhangers, didn't we?
There are a lot of cliffhangers. Well, I think we want to ask the question, what do you do? What is a practical, how do we practically live out this beautiful vision?
Yeah, because we laid out, here's the biblical sexual ethic, and this is what actually happens sometimes. And then people say, have fun with that, but we're not going to do that, are we?
Well, I think this is actually where the church gets scared.
Why?
Because it becomes uncomfortable. Because I don't want to ask the questions that I'm really thinking, because what if you think I'm weird? Or what if there's shame on whatever it is that this person's, thinking or has done even, or a way that they've lived that if they confess that in the church, then it's going to bring about shame.
So this episode is more on the practical level of like asking these questions
yes.
or talking about that? Okay.
Yeah, but what I want to do is I want to infuse it with the gospel, because I think I don't want to enter into this conversation without understanding that there is gospel grace and there is gospel freedom in knowing Christ and being his blood covering. In
your work as a counselor, what percentage, we didn't talk about this before we sat down, so
I'm scared.
I know, but what percentage of conversations have to do with either sex, marriage, relationships and stuff? Like what's the hot, like, I'm just curious. Like, I mean,
it depends on what kind of counselor you are and who is coming to see you.
Right.
I see mainly women.
Okay.
At this point in my life, I see mainly women leaders in a ministry context.
Okay.
But I would say if that doesn't actually exclude them from this conversation.
Right.
So it's all encompassing. I would say even with single women, I can tell you this is a piece of the conversation.
So I want to know what you think we should talk about. I think we should talk about at some level, how do we handle our sexual desires? Because I think that's something very practical that are still, okay, great, Mike. Thanks, Becca. You laid out the biblical sexual view, but okay, I have maybe I'm going to date myself with being a Gen X person, but my cousin Vinny, I have Marissa Tomei, she's stomping on the ground talking about her biological clock. Like we have these, urges, we have these feelings and stuff in us. How do we handle that? What about being a married person? What does a healthy sex life look like as a married person? What about lust and love? Like, where's the line there? I think talking about, is in the biblical sexual view where it's meant to be inside of marriage, are you then signing up some people to be forever single, and is that like a death sentence? So there's just lots of practical questions. And did you have anything else that you want to talk about?
Yeah, I mean, I think we need to talk about pornography and the part it's played and what it looks like in our culture, and even how it's infused into the church.
Okay.
Because man, is it there. But I think let's start off with talking about sexual attraction versus lust.
Okay.
So how would you define those two things?
That's a great question. The layman version that I have in my head is lust is wanting the body and love is wanting the person. I don't know where I came up with that. I'm sure I got it from someone else. But lust seems to be, I want the body for what that body or that thing for me, not for them. It's not other-centric. If marriage and sex is always supposed to be self-giving, where you're saying, who are you and how can I love you better? Lust is, who are you and how can I use that for me at some level? I think that's what's going on in pornography, because you're objectifying somebody else's son or daughter, somebody else's forever soul who's going to be around for all of time. You're saying, how can I use you for in this moment for myself? When you're walking down the street, and my wife and I've had this conversation. When we first got married, we were like, wait, can I never acknowledge like somebody else's beauty? We were talking about this together. She's like, Chris Pine. And I'm like, I forgot who. This is 20 years ago now.
I don't know. I walk a lot with your wife, so.
Yeah, you do. So she doesn't see Chris Pine anymore. But we were actually asking this question, like, where's the line here between? And I think where we got to is, you can acknowledge somebody's beauty and say, hey, that person's beautiful. But you cross the line when you start saying, yeah, and I wish I had that, and I want that, I need that. And you go the next step of what would it look like. Then it moves into lust. So I think that was helpful for me and for her to work through that.
So would you say there's a difference between finding someone attractive versus sexual attraction?
100%. I mean, I think the Bible's full of beauty. Humans were designed to acknowledge beauty. You go to the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and you'll see different forms of beauty over time. And so there's a cultural relative aspect of beauty. But we're allowed to acknowledge beauty without it moving over into lust, where when you say, hey, you go from that's beautiful to that's beauty that I need or want for myself. That's how I would define. How would you define lust?
Yeah, I think in our culture, people may tend to think about not lusting as not being realistic, because it's constantly thrown at us. You can't watch a TV show
because a lot of cultures designed
without a story of lust in it.
Yeah.
And people are watching fill in the blank on Netflix. I mean, and everybody's watching it. It's what actually draws them into the story is the story of lust. And so lust is seen as this enjoyable, pleasurable thing that when I experience it, my oxytocin goes off, and then I want that. And surely that can't be a bad thing because it feels good to want something like that. And so there's this narrative of it's okay to lust, but if I'm in a marriage, I'm just not going to act on it.
So would you agree with that? That, there's no way around it. This is just going to happen.
I'm so glad you're asking that, because what we need to be asking ourselves, you've got to follow the breadcrumbs back internally of, okay, well, what exactly do I find attractive? Why exactly do I want that? What is the purpose of me wanting that? What do I think it's actually going to get me? Am I acknowledging their beauty, or am I wanting to use their beauty as a tool to get something for myself?
So you almost have to kind of do like that sounds so tiring. I mean, I'm trying to think with the average person listening to us right now, are they going to be like, oh, that's so, you guys are so, just let it be. What's the big deal?
You're such a counselor. Well, I think that's knowing yourself. It's being made self-aware. And actually there's freedom to that, because what it frees me to do then is to look at someone and go, there's the Imago Dei. There is God reflected in the beauty of a person, because they have been created, and it won't last because they're going to be 85 one day.
Right.
And right now they look great, or whatever that on the outside, right? There is this external beauty, which is what we can do with a lot of things. When I go to the Met and I look at paintings, I'm thinking, that's amazing. Like, I can't do that. Look how whatever. And I think there's a sense in which we are designed to acknowledge beauty because beauty reflects God.
Right.
When I want to leverage that on my behalf,
or manipulate it
and use it as a tool to get me something, that's when it becomes bad. So I do think I'm still trying to listen with our listeners. Why does it become bad? Like, what's bad about what am I doing that's wrong with manipulating and using it? If you listen to the episode before this, it goes against a biblical sexual ethic, because sex is designed to be with another person, to be known, loved, cared for inside that context.
Well, and I think it leads to more brokenness, because now we're commodifying people. Now we're using people. Now that's not just...
Well, it leads to more brokenness because it's all internal.
Right.
It's about self.
Well, actually, I'm glad you brought that up, because this is where the rubber meets the road for our culture, which is some people would say, what I do in my bedroom does not actually hurt other people. Like,
False.
Well, no, people are like, hey, I'm whether it's masturbation or whether it's pornography or whatever it is, I'm not hurting other people. And you already said false, and I'm glad you did, because we would argue that you are not a brain in a vat, that every action that we do, positive or negative, is moving us either towards more human flourishing or away of human flourishing. And so if you're in the privacy of your bedroom objectifying a man or a woman in a way, that's going to affect how you move out into the world and interact with every individual. Yeah. You're going to treat them differently. You're going to treat everyone differently because of that. And I think there's actually now major names, Russell Brand, big, it used to be, Russell Brand's not a big name, but there used to be non-celebrities.
Depends on who you talk to.
Well, there used to be a lot of people that were, if you were anti-pornography or you were not sex positive, but I think there's been a switch in culture recently where people are realizing, oh, wait, there is an addiction here. There is a commodification. There is a problem here.
Yes.
That doesn't stop how hard it is for people because there's a shame, there's an issue, there's other issues going on. But, I think that's where we're at as far as when it comes to love and lust.
Well, I do think it's important for us to talk about pornography.
Okay.
And because it's everywhere, for one, and there's a spectrum, if you will, of whether you're looking at Netflix or whatever that you might look at or see or seek out. Statistically, it's off the charts.
For just men, right?
False. Another false.
I already knew that. I already knew that answer, but I'm letting you say it.
Yeah, it's false. And it's false both outside of the church and inside of the church. Right. Like statistics don't necessarily get better inside of the church. And I think that's something that really needs to be shouted from the rooftops. And also, it's not a male problem. It is a human problem.
Right.
And if you are a pastor listening to this and you're preaching about pornography or you mention pornography and you don't actually include that this is a human problem and not just a male problem, you are shaming a lot of your church. Because I'm telling you, many of the women in your pews are struggling with pornography.
I know when people talk only this is a male problem, it becomes even more shame for women who has a high percentage of this because you're ignoring the fact that this is an issue in that realm as well.
Yeah. So we'll acknowledge that it's a problem.
Okay, so it's a problem. What do we do with it now?
Well, why do we think it's a problem? What are the statistics, or what have you learned that
it's a problem,
leads you to think that it's a problem?
I think it's a problem because if lust is objectification and commodification of a person beyond the C.S. Lewis quote, it rings in my head is, if you really understood who is across from you, you said imago Dei. That's a, biblical term about made in God's image, and that one day they're going to be so radiantly beautiful and wonderful because of the new heavens, new earth on our own, persons is now radiating. We would not treat each other the way we treat each other. I think of that when it comes to porn, because we're not doing that when we're objectifying and using images or stories or whatnot. I think that's where it becomes a major problem because it leads to less human flourishing. But I'm this is staying in my head. This is all very heady. Yeah. I think you could probably make it more practical.
Well, it destroys our brain.
Okay.
How would you say that it does that?
Isn't it? I mean, if I remember correctly, it's the way our brain synapses like get dopamine and whatnot. It's like an addict. You keep getting from a certain way. This is the problem with scrolling as well. But is it desensitizes us to any of the other normal functions of how we get our neurotransmitters that bring pleasure. So it changes how we actually literally get pleasure in our brains. Yes.
It destroys our future relationships.
Why?
How would it do that?
I'm asking you now.
I'm giving you the reasons, and you gotta tell us why.
You put me on the spot. I mean, because I'm expecting from the other person that they're gonna act or look and be this way, and it's not the case.
So it destroys our brain.
Yeah, destroys our relationships. You said
destroys future relationships. It destroys society, in the sense of ethical concerns or consent, or sex trafficking, which is a massive problem
that nobody talks about.
And it influences the way that we think about how sex should be, right? We have this understanding of whatever the picture is or whatever the fantasy, if you will, is in front of you. And to think that needs to be recreated is not...
In some ways, it doesn't let us, not just inside marriages, but just inside like even friendships, doesn't let us just be normal people. We have to it treats the other person as if they have to be more than who they are, because it not even romanticizes, but I'm going to use the word flesh. It fleshizes and it's a fake word, but the other person, and doesn't let them be the full orbed aspect of who they are, which is pros and cons and pluses and minuses.
Yeah. And I think this does lead us into the conversation of masturbation, which is something we do need to talk about. And this is that practical aspect of this is something the church has not done a good job in talking about because of fear, because of whatever it might be.
And they always just say no. I mean, they always say no, no, no. So why is clearly masturbation is auto excitation. It's outside the bounds of a biblical sexual ethic because it's not mutually self-giving by definition. It's self-giving to yourself, but not to somebody else. So, but what's wrong with that? Well,
I think you asked this question of Sam Alberry last weekend.
I did.
What was his answer? Let's ask Sam. He's not here.
I mean, Sam's kind of said what I was just alluding to, which is it looks like it's safe because it's in the privacy of my own home. I'm not pushing this on anybody else, but because the whole apparatus was meant to be mimicked off of who God was, which is permanent relationship of self-giving care, you're not actually doing that, and because of that, it actually changes who you are. Where you start saying, I have to get my needs met, I have to get my urges, I have to get my way of doing life, and therefore it ends up hurting not just yourself but others in that sense. It's very intellectual though, so maybe you can make that more practical.
Well, I actually want to break this up into two different kind of categories, one within marriage and one outside of marriage.
Okay.
And I think that's important because a lot of people will say, well, as long as it's inside the context of your marriage and you're comfortable with it and there's consent there. So what if you have a spouse who's wanting you to look at porn with them? What do you do with that?
No, I mean, I see. There's the no.
But but we've already gone over. You're supposed to submit. To your spouse.
Sure, but
so how is saying no submitting to your spouse?
Because you're helping. Part of your job as a spouse is bringing them closer to who Jesus is, and when you're looking at porn together, you're essentially inviting somebody else into your committed apparatus relationship. And since we already said you're using them. Those images, I think it leads to more brokenness in your marriage, expectations, what you should be trying to get from each other. It creates many problems. I mean, you probably know it better than I do because of the counseling that you've had to do in these areas.
You keep using that as an excuse.
Oh, no, because you keep asking me and I keep pushing.
Well, because these are the questions that people are asking.
Yeah.
So when you are in a marriage, you're married, and you have been looking at porn together.
Yeah.
How would you decide not to do that any longer?
The two things that first come to my mind is one is there's grace for all brokenness. And so I know sometimes there can be shame and hurt of like, oh man, did I mess up? And I think Sam did a good job when he was here about this as well, which is one of the problems with this whole conversation, and maybe we should have started with this, is that there tends to be Christians, it feels like Christians look down on everybody else, like, you're so not doing it the right way. Instead of the context of actually all sexuality is broken. All people are broken. If Romans 3 is true and Ephesians 2 is true, that all are broken, then we should not, this is not the context where we're saying, I'm better than you. Heterosexual marriages, which both you and I are in, are broken at some level, and that means welcome to the party. You're actually not throwing stones at a glass house. We're all in it together in that sense. That would be the first step. The second step would be you're missing out. You don't know what you're really missing when you're inviting. You're not letting each other be the full person that they could be. When you're doing that. So I think the second step would be trying to realize what you're not getting that you think was okay, but now maybe it's not.
Yeah.
And trying to let that be the driving force to kind of help you make the actual behavioral changes to not do it anymore.
So what if, as a married couple then, and we're going to switch here in a minute and talk about singleness and what it looks like in a life of a single person, but in the marriage context then, if you're talking about sex drive and you're talking about this understanding of how sex should practically be in your marriage, how would you then, if you're struggling with
Like one couple, like one person might have a higher sex drive than the other person. Like
that, or I know for many people, sex can be painful.
Yeah.
Or maybe someone has a sexual past, a sexual abuse in their past, or maybe they were a part of the purity culture, and they're just when you get married, you're supposed to flip a switch, and all of a sudden you can have sex.
Or I know some people that were not Christians, and they had many sexual partners, and then they get married, and they bring a lot of those experiences into the marriage. So
when you are struggling together in your marriage of this is how sex should actually look, that's hard.
Yeah.
So how do you? What's the best? We can't tell everyone how to navigate that because every story is so different. So you can't say this is exactly what you do. But maybe let's set up a template for here's some things to think about as you begin on this journey of understanding sex in your marriage. First, I would say get help.
Get what?
Get help.
Outside help from other folks.
Yeah, don't be ashamed.
Yeah.
And keep that. Don't let the fear keep you from actually reaching out for help.
Yeah.
So that, as a counselor, I feel like I'm putting my money where my mouth is there. But what's some framework there for them to think about? Like, we need to reevaluate how we think about sex in our marriage and what that practically looks like. I mean,
off the top of my head, again, it's surprising not to say this, but I have to say it. I'm saying it to myself as well, which is we really do have to give each other grace. I think one of the reasons why there's so much shame about this is a husband is shameful of like, I need sex more than my wife does. Mm-hmm. And so that you can't talk about it because you're ashamed of it. Or if it's painful for a man or a woman, you don't want to talk about that. Mm-hmm. So I think you have to give each other enough grace and create space so that your spouse could actually feel comfortable enough to kind of express these things and talk about it. I think a lot of times we don't want to talk about it. And I think it's a struggle for a lot of couples to actually say, "Hey, when's the time?" Because you don't want to talk about it. You have to plan almost to say, "Hey, can we talk about this?" So give each other grace, plan to talk about it, and realize and ask questions and curiosity of saying, "Hey, how are we doing in this area?" Because I know for me, if we already can make the assumption it's probably broken in some way, then it should be safe for us to say, "Great, so then let's talk about that." And when I don't expect it to always be perfect, and it took me a while to get there, by the way. I got married very young. I had all these expectations because I'm like, oh, it's going to be great. And then you're like, you move into like, oh, wait, it's not as great as I thought it was going to be. Yeah. Working through that and then letting it be okay. I'm not asking from the marriage and from the sex life more than what it could have been in the first place. Mm-hmm. I think there's just so much wisdom in that process. Mm-hmm. But like you said, doing it with other people, not doing it by yourself, giving each other grace. Those would be off the top of my head, but you probably have better ones.
No, I mean, I think seeking to understand the context of where your spouse is coming from is really important.
What do you mean?
So I'm happy to use Andrew, my husband, and I as an example. So Andrew did not become a Christian until he was in his mid-20s. And so he did what he wanted before he became a Christian. When he became a Christian, he radically shifted how he acted, responded, what he chose to do with his heart, with his time, with his body, all of it. For him, he did bring some shame into our marriage because he went from living a life of pleasure outside of the bounds of the biblical sexual ethic to now I'm married and I'm going to change. Then he met me and I had come from a Christian home where I did sustain from sexual interaction until we got married. So we were coming from such wildly different places. But I wouldn't even say that I did it right because I didn't partake. I would say I was taught not to for reasons outside of maybe even an understanding that this is a beautiful thing to do. It was fear. It was from a pure.
So there's actually brokenness from
your side.
There's brokenness
on both sides.
Right.
But to get married then and to say, okay, now you can do whatever you want, or now you're free, go. And you're like, whoa. Like we don't even understand how it's supposed to look or what it's supposed to be, and we didn't have anyone to talk to about it.
Wow.
And so I think I think it took us years really to have that conversation, and we still don't have it perfectly understanding between us all the time. We have to revisit that conversation over and over again. But the context of understanding where another person comes from gives you grace to say, I know this is going to be hard for you to understand. It's hard for me to understand because I bring all this to the table.
And being curious.
What do you bring to the table?
And being curious, like, to not just giving each other grace, but like saying, actually, I want to know more about Andrew. I want to know more about Beck. I want to know where you're coming from. And
well,
that brokenness.
It allows you to look at the person and go, of course this is hard for you.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness, I didn't know that about you. Or wow, I can't imagine having to shift from what you experienced to who you are now. And so I think understanding the context of the person, but having a third person who does understand a biblical sexual ethic to say, hey, it's going to be okay. The gospel's real. We can actually do this together.
Right.
I could hear what you have to say, and there's no shame there.
And not asking too much from the marriage and the sex life, I think, is just getting to that place. Like not realizing that we've probably absorbed, even as married couples, a cultural understanding of sex, of it needing it to be something more than what it could be or should be, is important. I know there's probably a lot of single people listening to us right now, so we should probably shift to like, okay, so great, you can have this great conversation inside your marriage, guys. But
I want to be clear, though, the context that we're talking about of bringing all that stuff into marriage, the less you have to bring into that story,
it's helpful.
It's helpful.
Yeah.
So it is a word of caution that living in a way that the Bible pleads with us to actually makes your future marriage, if you are one day going to be married, easier. It does.
But as you pointed out, it shouldn't be based in fear. It shouldn't be based in like,
we could do the right things for all the wrong reasons.
Exactly.
Yes.
So now here we are. We're with if you're single, if you're listening, if I was you, I'd be saying, so you're basically signing me up. If I never get married, then I don't have these conversations with a future husband or wife because I'm not actually married. I can't actually talk about this. So there's just no place for me to have, there's not a place for me to work through my urges or my issues. So is it basically a death sentence? Is that what you're basically saying for not just my sex life, but for my life?
Well, I think by calling it a death sentence, you give it power that it doesn't need to have.
Okay.
You elevate it to something bigger than what it actually is, which is what we've talked about before. It gives it an importance. It's a desire, and we all have to keep our desires in check, whether sexual or not. I mean, my goodness, we all have wants and needs and desires. I can lust after something and it not be sexual.
Yeah.
Man, give me a good pair of jeans and tennis shoes. I'm like, how much does it cost? Like, I can want things that I don't
That's
need.
not my problem.
Shopping or fill in the blank, food, alcohol, all the things, right? I can lust after these things. And so lust isn't just about sexuality. Lust is about what's going on in the heart. So when we make it, is it a death sentence to be single forever?
It's possible that somebody's elevating this experience into a level of lust. Is that what you're saying?
I mean, would you ever go, is it a death sentence not to ever buy the pair of jeans that you want? No, that sounds goofy, right? Yeah. But I can lust after the things that I want.
So I agree with you. I think that's a good word. I think at the same time, the pastor in me, I've wept with many 50-year-old, 60-year-old single people. Yes. And there's a hurt and a heartache, and there's like a longing and desire as well, where it's like, I don't know if it's lust necessarily. It could be, but it could also be maybe an over-prioritization.
It can be a good desire, yes.
But it can also be a good desire and then never get fulfilled. And I think the problem with the answer that we can give at this point is that the church hasn't been the community that Paul, in one way, Jesus and Paul as being single individuals, for the first time in all of human civilization said being single is actually an okay way to live your life. No other culture ever did that until they showed up.
Didn't Paul actually say it was best?
I mean, he said, "I wish more of you were." He actually said, if you need each other, because you got your physical stuff going on, fine, get in marriage. But I wish you guys really could see the beauty of a single life lived for the Lord is actually very fulfilling and wonderful. That's all true. It's in the Bible. I completely believe it. I think where people have a hard time is they look at the individualization of our culture. They look at the community of our churches and they say, I don't see a path forward where I can actually live out this fulfilled life as a single person. And I actually understand that because I think our churches, at least in America, don't have the depth of relationship that they should. Probably because in America we don't have the depth of relationships, period. We've broken off into these smaller, siloed spaces. So I guess I want to theoretically say that Paul is very clear that you can have a very fulfilled life because you get your triune community in the larger apparatus of the church. I also want to acknowledge a lot of times the church hasn't been able to do that. And I think it's a real call to us saying, if our churches aren't safe spaces for single people, then we're doing something wrong, because we're not actually creating spaces where people actually can be fully known, fully cared for in a single life.
Yeah. I think we need to be a safe place for everybody.
Yes.
But yes.
Well,
I want to turn it to the physical piece to this. So I think about, I've talked several times about turning on the TV or reading a book or whatever it might be. And there's this picture of sexual intimacy that is so elevated.
Yeah.
That the question is asked, am I supposed to go my whole life without having a sexual encounter? Or am I supposed to go my whole life without having an orgasm? Or am I supposed to go my whole life without fulfilling these desires? As a single person, am I supposed to just never have any of those experiences? How would you encourage them?
I think we don't realize, and I'm saying this to married people and single people, what sex, intimacy, physicality, as great as it is and could be, what it was always meant to point towards, which is the depth. God is, often depicted in the Bible as the bridegroom, and that means we're all brides of Christ, everybody. And he seeks after his bride and wants to have that relationship and wants to be intimate and to see the beauty in us. He does, and for us to see the beauty in him. And I think we are physical, tangible beings. God made us this way, and we're made for physical, tangible relationship, bodily. Mm-hmm. And Jesus becoming human, the body is affirmed over and over and over again in the Bible. But saying that if you don't have this, I will not be fully human. On one level, I think the answer is, yeah, at some level there is a disjointedness, but that's okay because we all have it. Married people have a there's something that's off in a married relationship forever and it'll never be solved. And there's something to be off in a single relationship that can only be filled and solved in the future with a relationship with him.
Yes. I would also say that actually Jesus was fully human. He was perfectly human.
Yeah.
And he never had these experiences.
What do you mean?
Well, we don't, as far as we know, we don't read about Jesus having a sexual encounter in the Bible.
Right.
Right. So we know
that it's possible to be fully fulfilled as a single person. Is that what you're saying?
And be fully, perfectly human.
Yeah. And yet, I want to also say he was perfect.
He was perfect.
And we're not.
Yeah.
So I think I want to acknowledge there's a possibility, but I also want to acknowledge there's also probably on this side of the cross.
Yes, and I'm thinking about speaking to, you are not less of a human if you don't experience that.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. You actually are, because Jesus did not experience that. Right. He didn't need to because he was perfect.
Right.
And so it doesn't make you less fulfilled as a human.
Right.
Because Jesus was fully, perfectly human.
Yeah. We need to wrap it up, but any last phrases or encouragements that you'd give single or married people? We're not, again, we're scratching the surface in just this 2-part series that we've been talking about.
Yeah, there's so much more to say about this. So there are books and books and books written on this on purpose. It's kind of dangerous to have this conversation just for this short amount of time.
I know.
And so there's so much. What you need to think about is these conversations are a tip of an iceberg of fully robust conversations that you should be having. Go have them with your pastor. Go have them with your counselor.
And with your friends. And
go have them in your community groups and your friends. Not everybody's going to give you the right answer either.
Yeah.
So you need to be a Berean in the sense of asking questions.
Yeah.
And seeking the answers from God's word and from his community. So this conversation is not perfect. Yeah. We're not going to get everything right.
Well, and we're having it because we care about human flourishing. We want people to actually and there's
people should be talking. We should just be talking about it.
Because, well, first of all, our culture is not a neutral space. It is presenting us a view of human sexuality and relationship, and we're having to compare and contrast and say, is that actually going to bring more or less
Yeah.
human flourishing. I think we've talked about why it doesn't. It's still going to be something that needs to be worked through, and we have to do it not on an individual level. Ironically, we have to do it out in community, so in our churches, in our relationships. So hopefully this is the beginning of a conversation for whoever's listening to continue elsewhere.
And I'm happy to people reach out to me if they have any questions. Email me.
Thanks, folks, for listening, and thanks for this time for our Q&R podcast. Becca, it's always a joy to be with you.
Thanks for listening to our Q&R podcast. We hope this episode encourages you as you process questions together. For more episodes, visit our profile on Spotify or our YouTube channel.